Welcome to the Workology Podcast, a podcast for the disruptive workplace leader. Join host Jessica Miller-Merrill, founder of Workology.com, as she sits down and gets to the bottom of trends, tools, and case studies for the business leader, HR, and recruiting professional who is tired of the status quo. Now here's Jessica with this episode of Workology.
The field of neuroscience for leadership in the workplace is a growing one. Research is connecting past behaviors and experience to employee engagement, learning, and also how you adapt your workplace to change. When it comes to adapting to change, this is a skill that I think everyone needs, and in spades. It seems we are moving at a faster pace than ever, maybe because we need to further our business, technology, or just to do your best personally and professionally. Joining me to talk about the growth and application in neuroscience is Britt Andrietta. She's the CEO of Seventh Mind, Inc.
Britt, welcome to the Workology Podcast.
Thank you, Jessica. I'm excited to talk to you today.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your background because it's not the traditional human resources or recruiting background. I'm fascinated. I've listened to your TED Talk, but I want you to talk about how you got here and some of the work that you do.
Well, my doctorate is in education, leadership, and organization. So I've always studied that intersection of kind of learning and leadership and what brings out the best in people and organizations. And so that has led me to, I've done a lot of research and written books, and then I'm one of the top authors in lynda.com/LinkedIn Learning. And I've really been kind of on the front edge of bringing neuroscience principles into the workplace because they're so relevant for the work that we do. So I have been a scholar in the past, but I think more importantly to your listeners, I'm a practitioner, and I was the chief learning officer at lynda.com for 5 years. And before that, I've been a consultant for 20 plus years working on leadership strategy and learning strategy for organizations all around the world of all kinds of sizes, including, Fortune 50 companies.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited about this topic because, as you said, it's just something that's starting to move into the workplace. I think about it a lot in marketing and psychology, and I read those articles and journal articles, and I think they're interesting, but how do you make that transition? So first, can you kind of walk us through the basics and talk to us a little bit about what neuroscience is?
Sure. Neuroscience itself is a very broad field. So neuroscience is the study of anything that has to do with the brain, the spinal cord, or any nerve structure in your body. So there's a range of scientists studying all kinds of minutia about all of that. But really what we're looking at is kind of how we're wired. What's the biological wiring of human beings and what allows us to function at our peak and at our best and bring out our potential, as well as what can create challenges or work against our biology. And so it actually has applications to any industry, any field, colleges and universities, school districts, corporations, nonprofits. And I'm just really excited about kind of the renaissance that's happening in neuroscience. There's really been a shift in the medical technology, and it's allowing scientists to look in the brain and the body in ways that we've never been able to do before. So we're really on this voyage of discovery. And one of the things I like to do is to synthesize all the research that's happening in neuroscience and turn it into practical takeaways for those of us who work in workplace environments of all kinds of organizations.
I love that. And I think that it's much needed because there's a lot of scientific work that's being done, and sometimes it has a lot of scientific speak, and you can kind of be the translator to allow us to be able to apply those in our offices, because who doesn't want to be at our best? I think that most of our employees, or certainly when I go into the office every day, I don't want to just be I want to be a top performer, and I want to be able to know the ways in which I can achieve that.
Absolutely. And, organizations want the best out of their people. And oftentimes the way they've structured the workplace is actually preventing people from being their best. So we have this odd kind of tension that I think really neuroscience gives us some keys to unlock that and make some important shifts in how we vision and set up workplaces.
Let's talk a little bit about that. Can you kind of talk about maybe some applications or a couple good stories of how neuroscience is being applied and it can help employees and workplaces be at their best?
For sure. I mean, one I think that a lot of people have heard of is the shift in how we're doing performance management and particularly performance ratings. There's a lot of studies being done and has been done on kind of the biology of what gets triggered during performance reviews and being rated and these annual processes. And so a lot of companies are making shifts to new ways of looking at it, including activating the growth mindset. So the growth mindset is Carol Dweck's research. She's a psychologist out of Stanford. And she really looked at what differentiates people who are successful from those who are not. And it comes down to mindset. Growth mindset folks believe they can always grow, they can always improve, they're willing to put in the time and energy to grow and get better. Where fixed mindset folks think, I've got these innate abilities and I can't make them any better. My intelligence is what it is. My people skills are where they are. So I've just got to be good with what I have. And Carol, even though she's not a neuroscientist, has really, it's the outpouring of what is not, a neuroscience truth about us, which is our brains actually can grow all the way up until the moment of death. We can form new neural pathways. We can learn new things. We can get better at things all the way up until we die. So a lot of performance management is very static. It doesn't measure growth. It doesn't measure improvement. And actually, it can trigger a fear response in people. We can see that the amygdala is very activated. The amygdala is our fight or flight survival mode. And it also activates the habenula. And the habenula is the brain structure that's responsible for how we track failure so that we don't fail again in the future. And actually, a lot of our performance management systems are experiences of failure for people, even if it's 90% good news. So that's one clear example where we're looking at the brain science and it's helping a lot of companies shift how they think about performance management. I have focused my work on how it helps us understand how people learn so we can design better learning experiences and learning cultures. And also my most recent book is on change and why we've really been getting change initiatives and rolling out change wrong from a brain perspective. So really looking at how we can help people thrive through change and help change be more successful when an organization puts a lot of time and energy into designing a change initiative. So those are a couple kind of examples. And then my latest research is on the neuroscience of teams. I'm going to be sharing that this spring at a few conferences, and then I'm going to be, that'll be my next book, is on the neuroscience of how we bring out the best in teams.
I love this. And I think that anyone who is listening can find value in this. And especially change. I mean, even as a personally versus professionally or in the workplace, change is all around us. So how do we help make that change more smoothly, or how can we help grow as individuals?
Yeah, absolutely. So my latest book is on the neuroscience of change. And what I found in kind of delving into the neuroscience of it is that there's some key brain structures that really can get activated during change. And we're really not designing change for how the brain and the body respond to it. Change is in essence a threatening event for the human person. And so most people have some resistance to change. They have a fear or frustration response that's kicked off. And leaders who've spent a lot of time designing a great change oftentimes are really surprised by a lot of the emotional grumbling that they see. And that can have them not moving the change forward in productive ways. Sometimes they even pull the change back because they're surprised by what is actually a very normal response to change. And in addition, leaders forget that they were on the leading edge of it. They saw a problem, they were designing the edge, they had an orientation to that change that was problem solving. But when you're an employee and these leaders are now announcing this change initiative, whatever it is, you're on the receiving end. And we're biologically wired to then scan for what we could potentially lose and how this could be a bad thing. And so there's a disconnect right now between kind of how we think about change and how the human body responds to it. In addition, there's entire structures of our brain that are designed to help us map physical places. So, as you go to work every day, you've made a map of that place. And if they were to all of a sudden change your cubicle or changed where you went to get IT help, you would have to edit your map. Your brain knows how to do that. But oftentimes with change, we mess with people's structural maps of how they work and where they go to work and who they work with. And that also includes social maps, social network maps that we make. So that can be something that gets activated with change, is that we're messing with people's maps and not necessarily doing a good job of helping them build new ones. And we're certainly messing with habits. Most change initiatives ask people to not only stop doing something that's easy, comfortable, fast, but start doing something that's uncomfortable, awkward, and difficult. And we don't necessarily set up the change journey to help them move through that as smoothly as possible. So there's lots of interesting implications for change, and particularly I ended up building a whole new model for this, which has been kind of fun, and people are saying it's really helping them do better with change. But particularly, it helps us identify what kind of leadership skills the managers need so that they can take their team, whatever that team looks like, through change successfully. And oftentimes that's not in place, and then you get into it and it's messy and it doesn't go well. So there's lots of things we can use now to help people thrive through change and adapt to change much more easily.
Let's take a bit of a reset here. This is Jessica Miller Merrill, and you're listening to the Workology podcast. Today, we are talking about applying neuroscience in the workplace. You can follow Britt on Twitter at Britt Andreatta. That's BrittAndreatta. Let's get back to it.
A couple things that you just said really resonated with me, and probably also with our podcast listeners, is the leadership skills. Like, most managers don't have the skills or an understanding of change, and as you're talking about the science behind change, particularly around the brain. And then the other thing that I thought was interesting is the saying, like, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Based on what you're saying, that's false, that we can learn new ways of thinking, new ideas throughout our life. It just involves creating different or new neural pathways so that our brain can manage and ourselves can manage through those changes and those just different way of doing things.
Absolutely. The brain science is conclusive that we can and we do wire new neural pathways all of the time. And so it's false to hold a view of yourself that you cannot change, but many people do. So part of what I do when I work with organizations is, first of all, how do you take your fixed mindset folks and help them embrace the growth mindset? And a lot of it is just sharing this data, that if they start to understand how the brain works and they start to realize how they can support themselves in developing new skills and abilities, they actually can change their mindset and become much more focused. What I love is that the hallmark phrase of growth mindset is the word yet. And so a growth mindset person might say, well, I'm not great at this yet, but if I put in the time, I'll get better. I don't know how to speak Spanish yet. I'm learning how to manage. It's something I don't know how to do yet. So I really talk about, really using the power of yet as a way to help people start to shift their view. And I've even worked with corporations to add yet to performance reviews. So instead of not achieving goals or not performing at the right level, it's not yet performing, meeting expectations, not yet achieving the goals. And that does a whole lot to shift the aspirational nature for both the brain and the person who's attached to it, that personality that may feel like they've been pigeonholed and mislabeled.
So Shirley, if you do already have a growth mindset and you do feel like your career isn't going the direction that you want, or maybe it's a manager or a leader in the office, that's pretty uncomfortable and can lead to a lot of anger, resentment, and all those things that lead a really great employee potentially to leave the workplace and go to somewhere else.
Absolutely. One of the next things that's coming out is some new, in fact, I'm doing this at Sherm. So I've got a half-day workshop on creating a culture of learning based on the growth mindset. But we're really looking at a lot of that is created by the manager, right? The experience that the employee has on a day-to-day basis to thrive in that environment is created by the manager. And the data's been true for decades that people leave a manager, not a job. And so, we got to get really crisp about how do we help managers create the right environments for people to thrive and grow. And we have to then hold them accountable. Managers have to be held accountable for the growth and the success of their team. And oftentimes companies give lip service to it, but their managers are not really held accountable for engagement, promotions, retention, all of the things that are indicators of how healthy that team is.
One of the things I'm thinking about it is you're talking personally, and as I've done in my previous talks have talked about managing up and how kind of socializing an idea or a new program or just something that you want to help impact the larger organization, and it could be a major or a minor change. But looking at some of the things that you've been talking about, this sounds like a book that you can use to help your leaders be successful, but also help you be able to drive change in the workplace using neuroscience.
Absolutely. In fact, I always write my books. I've got 2 out now. One's Wired to Grow, which is on the neuroscience of learning. And anyone can use it to help themselves learn better, faster. And if you design learning for other people, including as a manager or a parent or a healthcare worker or a teacher, it gives you some tips about how to create better learning for others. And then on the change one, I really wrote it on 3 levels. One is for, I call them expedition designers. They're the people, because the whole metaphor I use is that we're on a change journey. It's not an event, it's a journey. So there's the expedition designers. These are the leaders who decide that a change is needed, and they do a lot of the designing of the change. And then you've got guides, which are the managers who are kind of handed a change, saying, you got to get your people through this, and here you go. So tools for them on how to guide a team through successful change. And then people who are going through the actual change themselves are what I call the travelers. They're traveling on that journey. And all of us end up travelers at some point. Even if you're the CEO of a company, at some point somebody dictates a change to you that you may or may not be on board for. So absolutely, we can, as individuals, take more responsibility for how we move through change, and even compensating for having poor guides or less than effective managers or supervisors. We can do a lot to compensate for that in empowering ourselves to be successful through change.
A lot of the questions and conversations that I tend to have with some of the listeners of the podcast and readers from the blog is, how do I take these ideas or this idea that I have and get my CEO to be okay and comfortable with this new change? Or how do I get the seat with the executive team to be able to make an impact like I would love to be able to? And it sounds like to me that your book provides some guidance and really great insights in how to help accomplish that.
Yes, for sure. I mean, biologically, when you're talking about change, the brain naturally sees it as a potential danger and sorts for worst case scenario. And in the absence of another narrative, people will fill in their own version of the worst case scenario. So when you understand that, you can do a much better job of being prepared that that's going to happen. Even if you're awesome at leading change, there's still going to be some grumbling and some resistance, because people are not being difficult. They're being human. There's just a natural transition that they have to go through as they get on board with this idea and they get accustomed to it. But in addition, when you understand that that's how people are going to sort, you communicate the change very differently. You seek buy-in in completely different ways. You design the change rollout differently. And that's where we're seeing a big shift with people being much more effective in leading change, is when they understand kind of the brain science of it. They go, oh, people instantly grok it, and they see it because they've lived it. You know, everyone I've presented this material to or who's read the book has gone, oh my gosh, you just explained everything that has ever happened. In fact, I just had a CEO write me saying, I have started 7 different companies and I've gone through 3 different mergers, and I wish I'd had your book for every single one of them, because this would have saved us so much pain and anguish as we were doing these things. So I think what's great is that, you know, I really believe that if we have these tools, these understandings of how we work, it really helps us all create a much better workplace, no matter what the goal of our organization is. And it makes work more fun. You know, we're part of a team that's doing it together then, as opposed to someone's imposing this on somebody else and isn't tuned into what's happening.
Let's talk a little bit about failure, because I feel like all this change is great, but as you were saying, that people are looking at other scenarios, and they tend to go to the negative ones, which would be this change isn't working, or this isn't going to make sense. What are your thoughts on failure? Is this a good thing, a bad thing? How does neuroscience play into that?
Great question. So I'm going to make a distinction between what you just said and what you're asking. So when people hear about change, they sort for worst case scenario. So it's not necessarily about failure. So if it's announced that, my team is merging with another team, the human response is going to be, what am I going to lose in that? Do I lose status in that? Am I going to get a new boss that maybe isn't as good for me as the boss I have? Will I be asked to relocate? What could I lose that matters to me? Failure is a whole other thing. And failure is absolutely part of our everyday life. It's part of growing and learning. And what we're finding is that teams that thrive absolutely have an environment where it's okay to fail. Not that meaning that, okay, keep failing, it doesn't matter if you do good work, but that it's safe to take risks, it's safe to make mistakes and harness the learnings from that. In fact, Dr. Amy Edmondson out of Harvard has coined the term psychological safety. And she's done some work with Google and some other big companies, and it's being identified as like the key differentiator between teams that really thrive and are healthy and those that struggle, is that the leader creates an environment where the team has psychological safety. And that means, yes, you absolutely have to be able to take risks and put yourself on a limb and stretch and try something new. And in the right environment, you feel safe enough to do that. And you're supported in going, okay, what do we need to do differently so we don't repeat that? What are the learnings from that? How can we harness that into some new innovation? So you're right, failing is super important. And I do a lot of work with organizations on learning culture. And oftentimes they want to talk about the visible things of learning culture. What are their programs and offerings? How do they use different vendors and tools to make learning accessible? But I have a new model where I'm talking about that is kind of what's above ground, but what's below ground is the soil, and the soil that people grow in is psychological safety. And if they don't have it, it's almost like having a tree sitting in toxic soil. That tree can never reach its full potential because it can't pull from that, the health of that soil in order to thrive. And it doesn't matter if you're sitting in toxic soil, all the amazing learning programs in the world won't compensate. But if you're in decent soil, those learning programs can now really accelerate your growth and your ability to reach your potential.
So you mentioned the pre-conference workshop that you're going to be doing at Sherm. Can you talk a little bit about that? And then are you speaking in a regular general session or a mega session as well?
Yes. So the pre-conference one is how to create a growth, a learning culture based on the growth mindset. So it's a half day, and we're going to do a deep dive into psychological safety and how to create the right kind of environment for people to thrive, and then also how to create a learning strategy that brings out the best in people. So it's going to be a nice combination of all these different things I've been talking about. And then later in the week, I'm doing a 1-hour session on my Neuroscience of Change stuff. So the Wired to Resist book and the Change Journey model that I've created. So those are both happening. And then if any of your listeners are also going to ATD, I'm doing 2 different talks at ATD in May. One is on the neuroscience of teams and a shorter version of creating a culture of learning.
Well, wonderful. This is one of my favorite podcast conversations that we've had as of recent. And I can't wait to really dive into your books and see you at Sherm Annual. Where can people go to learn more about you and the work that you do outside of going to the conference and seeing your session?
Oh, fantastic. Yes. So my website, brittandriata.com, has everything you'd need to know to kind of see what I'm up to, links to all of my online courses that I have, what's happening with my books. I've got an upcoming webinar at the end of May and another one in June. So you can kind of find all things Britt on brittandriata.com. And then I love to connect with people on LinkedIn. I have quite a lot of followers on both LinkedIn and Twitter, and so that's a great way to kind of receive my posts. I post regularly on all these topics related to bringing out the best in people and workplaces. So I would love to meet your followers by having them link up with me and to connect with me through my social media channels.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Jessica. It's been a great conversation, and I look forward to seeing everyone in New Orleans.
The topic of neuroscience and leadership, change, and the workplace is a fascinating one, and I'm very excited that Britt is investing time, not just in the learning community, but also human resources and recruiting. I can see a million different ways that her research and methods can be applied. I'm excited to dive into her work, her book, and more. I hope you will too. Thank you for joining the Workology Podcast, a podcast for the disruptive workplace leader who's tired of the status quo. This is Jessica Miller-Merrill. Until next time, you can visit workology.com and listen to all our previous podcast episodes. Have a great day.
Production services for the Workology Podcast with Jessica Miller-Merrill provided by TotalPicture.com.